Hi everyone, good morning. Before I start my report, I will introduce myself. I am Mary Rose George and I am from University of Perpetual Health. I am taking Master of Arts in Education, major in Educational Management. And in our class, I was assigned to discuss this chapter 6, Communication, Culture, and Organizing. So I hope with this topic, you will enjoy watching. At the same time, you will enjoy learning. So without further ado, let's start!
So I will start with Chapter 6, Communication, Culture, and Organizing. So one way to understand communication is to view as a people process rather than a language process. If one is to make fundamental improvement in communication, one must make changes in interpersonal relationships. So one possible type of alteration is that reducing the degree of defensiveness. Next, definition and significance. So defensive behavior is defined as that behavior which occurs when an individual perceives threat or anticipates threat in the group. So the person who behaves defensively even though he or she always gives some attention to the common task, devotes an appreciable portion of energy to defending himself or herself. Besides talking about the topic, she thinks about how they appear to others, how they can may be seen more favorable, how they may win, dominate, impress, or escape punishment, or how they may be avoid the imitate perceived attack. Such inner feelings and outward acts tend to create similarly defense posture in others, and if unchecked, the ensuring circular response become increasingly destructive. So defensive behavior, in short, is endangers defensive listening, and this in turn produces postural, facial, and verbal cues which raise the defense level of the original communicator. So that is the defensive behavior. Next is the defense arousal. So when we say defense arousal, this is to prevent the listener from concentrating upon the message. So as a person becomes more and more defensive, he or she becomes less and less able to perceive the motives, the values, and the emotion of the senders. So defensive behaviors have been correlated positively with losses in efficiency in communication. Next is that not only do defensive communicators send off multiple values, motive, and effect cues, but also the defensive recipients distort what they receive. So the converse, moreover, also is true. The more supportive or defense reductive the climate, the less the receiver reads into communication. So distorted loadings which arise from projections of his own anxieties, motives, and concerns as defensive are reduced, the receivers become better to be able to concentrate upon the structure, the content, and the cognitive meaning of the message. So that is the defense arousal. So next is the categories of defensive and supportive communication. So from Jack Gibb developed 6 pairs of defensive and supportive categories presented below. So behavior which is a listener perceive as a processing any of the characteristics listed in the left-hand column arouses defensiveness, whereas that which he interprets as a having the qualities of designated as a supportive reduce defensive feelings. So this is the evaluation and description. First is the speech or other behavior which appear evaluated increase of defensiveness. So if the listener thought, so this one, if the listener thought that the speaker regarded his or her as an equal and was being open spontaneously, for example, the evaluated in a message would be neutralized and perhaps not even perceived. This same principle applies equally to the other 5 categories of potential defense producing climates, because our attitudes toward other people are frequently and often necessary evaluative expression which the defensive person will regard as non-judgmental are hard to frame. Even the simplest question usually conveys the answer that the sender wishes or implies the response that would fit into his or her value system. So next is the manner of speech, tone of voice, or verbal content. The sender seems to be evaluating or judging the listener. The receiver goes on guard. Of course, other factors may inhibit the reaction. Next, the behavior characteristic of supportive climates. So first we have evaluation. Next is control. Next is strategy. Next is neutrality. Number 5 is superiority. And number 6 is certainty. So these are the behavior characteristic of a supportive climates. So we also have this behavior characteristic of supportive climates again. So the first one is description. Next one is problem orientation. Next is spontaneously. The fourth is empathy. Next is equality. And the last is provisionalism. So anyone has attempted to train professionals to use information seeking speech with neutral effects, appreciates how difficult is it to teach a person, say, even the simple, how did that, without being seen as an accusing. So, speech is frequently judgmental that there is a reality base for the defensive interpretations which are so common when in secure group, members are particularly likely to become blamed, to see others as fitting into categories of good or bad, to make moral judgment of their colleagues, and to question the value motive affects the loading of speech which they hear. Since the value loadings imply the judgment of others, a belief that the standard of the speaker differ from his or her own causes the listener to become defensive. So next, we have descriptive speech. So contrast to that which is evaluative tends to arouse a minimum of unused speech act in which the listener perceives a genuine request for information or as material with neutral loadings is descriptive. Specifically, presentation of feelings, events, perception, or process, which do not ask to imply that the receiver change behavior or attitude are minimally defense-producing. Next is the strategy and spontaneity. Okay, ulit. Strategy and spontaneity. When the sender is perceived as engaged in a strategy involving ambiguous and multiple motivation, the receiver becomes defensive. So, no one wishes to be a genuine fig or a role player or an impressed actor, and no one likes to be the victim of some hidden motivation that is concealed also may appear larger than it's really what's in the degree of defensiveness of the listener determining the perceived size of the elements. So the intense reaction of reading the audience to the material in the hidden procedures and indicates the prevalence of defensive reaction to multiple motivation behind the strategy. Next is neutrality and empathy. Communication that conveys empathy for the feelings, respect for the others, worth of the listener, however, is particularly supportive and defense reductive. Reassurance results when a message indicates that the speaker identifies himself or herself with the listener's problems, share her feelings, and accept her emotional reaction at face value. So, abortive efforts to deny the legitimacy of the receiver's emotion by assuring the receiver that she needs to feel badly, that she could not feel rejected, or she is overly anxious, although often intended as supporting giving, may impress the listener as lack of acceptance. The combination of understanding and with this person, emotion with no accompanying effort to change him or her as a supportive at a high level. So these are next, the superiority and equality. When a person communicates to others that he or she feels superior in position, power, wealth, intellectual ability, physical characteristics, or other ways, she or she arouses defensiveness. So here, as with other sources of disturbance, whenever arouses feelings of inadequacy, causes the listener to center upon the affect loading of statement rather than the cognitive elements. So the receiver then reacts by not hearing the message, by forgetting it and competing with the sender, or becoming jealous with him or her. Next is certainty and provisionalism. So the effects of dogmatism in producing defensiveness are well known. Those who seem to know the answers, that require no additional data, and to regard themselves as teachers rather than as a co-worker, tend to put others on guard. So moreover, in the listeners often perceive manifest expression of certainly as connotating inward feelings of inferiority. They see the dogmatic individual as a needing to be right, as wanting to with an argument rather than to solve a problem, and as seeing with his or her ideas as truth to be defended. This kind of behavior is often associated with acts which others regarded as attempts to exercise control. So people who are in the right seem to have the low tolerance for members who are in the wrong. For example, who do not agree with the sender. So next is, these are my reference. Nauna lang po siya dun sa slides kanina. So kung gusto niyo pong makita, you can look this reference and you can check it. And that's all for today. Thank you. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy listening as well as you enjoy learning. So again, this is Mary Rose George from University of Perpetual Health. Thank you so much for listening.